I'm curious what the most rewarding part and the most difficult part of all of your guys' different career paths has been, or potentially along that lines, a difficulty you hadn't anticipated to be as difficult as it was.
One of the things that I really struggled with over the course of medical school was actually making a decision at the end of all of it about what I wanted to go into. Every single, which I thought it was going to be super clear cut. I came in knowing I wanted to do family medicine, so I was all dead set on that. Then I ended up falling in love with literally every single rotation that I did. Like OB, you get to see babies pop out and do surgeries, and psych, you get to spend an hour with every single patient, and emergency medicine, you get the high acuity, really intense stuff that you fix right away. And so when it came time for residency applications, I hemmed and hawed, and I really didn't think it would be that much of a problem. But I was fortunate over the course of my medical school career to, one, be in contact with the mentors that I had back in undergrad that I met through the UBRP program, but also to have physicians that I'd worked with over my time in medical school that I could kind of touch base with and use as a springboard to kind of bounce ideas off of. So it was a surprising challenge, but one that I felt my support system was able to help navigate me through.
Coming from a different angle, being in more of a role with IT, for a while, I mentioned in my introduction that I worked for a software company. There were pros and cons to that. So on the positive side, I was working with scientists that were in biotech and pharma, food sciences, ag, oil and gas, many different industries, but all research and development, right? And there's this common thread and a sort of a rapport you can build with scientists across many different industries. And so that was very rewarding to see how research happens in multiple industries. The tough part, though, is being when I was at that software company is, even though I was in a professional services group, so I was helping with understanding the requirements, how do you deploy the system to help them, et cetera, you're still selling. And so I found along the way that sales is not my thing. And so I felt very fortunate as I got back into working as an associate for the company I work for, because you're truly a partner with the scientists. You're really helping to enable the science. And that's very rewarding for me. So I think that's about it.
For me, the most rewarding part is staying flexible, because I didn't even know I wanted to do any space medicine or space physiology till senior year of undergrad. I had no exposure to it before then. None of my classes talk about it. I just knew I liked BME, but BME is super broad. So part of that, I guess, is the hardest thing is knowing where I want to be, but not how to get there. So I kind of just have to keep in mind that, oh, hey, what I'm doing now, I wouldn't have imagined 3 years ago. So even if I have an idea of where I want to be in 3 years, I just got to keep moving, and it may change, and be okay with that. And just kind of have faith in the process.
Yeah. I'd like to say I love what I do, man. I am a brain studying the brain. What's going on? I really feel myself, at the forefront of our knowledge as humans. And I love that. It's scary because it's I have no idea what I'm doing, and no one else knows either. But it's so much fun for me. I think the challenging part, and I think most of the panelists would agree, and I've talked with a lot of my friends in different careers, is we really don't learn how to take care of ourselves. Undergrad is all about, you're taking classes, you're doing honors, you're doing clubs, maybe you're in, sports, all these different things, you're doing research. And I think when you start getting in more advanced stages of your career or education, you start to fatigue a little bit just because you've been working so hard for so long. So I really think I wish I could go back in time and tell myself, slow down a little bit, figure out self-care things that really help you recharge and get rest so that, long term, I can do decades of science rather than short little bursts of, I'm going to work 80 hours this week. That's not sustainable. And, you know, I really think having a hobby really helps. I picked up crocheting with the pandemic, pretty bad at it. I'm making a large rectangle, still working on it. But, you know, I think just having something separate from your work really helps with that work-life balance.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. I think there's two things that sort of surprised me. I feel like I still have no idea what's going on and I'm flying by the seat of my pants. And that feeling just never goes away. So I think you just learn to kind of cope with it and work around it. I mean, I have it happen all the time in the ER when I have a patient who comes in and we get all the lab work back and I still have no idea what's going on with them. And really, I think trying to find ways to deal with that and come to a solution where instead of just throwing your hands up, it's like, well, I don't know. It's like, well, you go back and talk to the patient about what's going on. And then you usually figure something out that maybe you missed before or overlooked. But I do think, you know, saying no at appropriate times is also really important. People will always ask you to do stuff and it never ends. And I feel like a lot of my time is spent explaining to people what my job role is and where it extends and what my limits are. And I've just gotten a lot more proactive about kind of managing that. If there's something that I don't want to be involved in, I have too much on my plate. You know, I tend to do that. Sometimes people are receptive, sometimes people aren't. You know, it's pretty much drilled into us that we never call out sick for anything and we're always available as physicians. So that's not really a good way to live life. So I sometimes as a joke, I'll just throw out bizarre excuses. It's like, oh, can you cover this shift? It's like, no, I don't really, I just want to sit at home on my sofa. But if I say that, then it doesn't sound good. So I think one of the excuses I came up with one time was, well, I'm really busy. I'm constructing a life-size statue of Barry Goldwater in chrome illusion. And people don't know what to do about it. Now it's ridiculous. But they're like, oh, okay. But they leave you alone. So sometimes it just, you find different ways to cope with it. But yeah, I think those two things, saying no and having no idea what's going on is kind of surprising still, especially after all that education.
Great, thank you. And I think Camille, did you still have a question?
Yeah, I think it was kind of being touched on, just like if you would change something, like, or tell yourself, your past self, something to change or to participate in or anything, either during UBRP or throughout your career, what would it be?
I would say take advantage of any writing opportunities. I did get a paper out of my UBRP lab, but not as first author. And like looking back on it, I'm like, oh, I definitely could have. Like my PI she assigned me projects and I did like an entire summer experiment. I had my own mouse colony. And I'm kind of like, why didn't I write anything about that? So like take advantage of any writing opportunities available.
Yeah, I would also say the same thing. If you can pick up a writing course or a speaking course, you know, as you move on, communication is going to be such a huge part of what you do, and to be able to communicate effectively can make or break your career. And so learning how to write and speak effectively will do wonders for you no matter what you end up doing. And so I would try to figure something like that out.
I think that for me, going back and trying to figure out my own personal learning style a little bit earlier on, I think that a lot of undergrad is kind of the same sort of rote lecture format that you kind of are pushed into a lot, but that style really never worked well for me. But I assumed it must because that's what everyone else was doing. Then once things started to kick up after I graduated from undergrad, I realized that I had to make some drastic changes to the way that I personally learned, and I feel much more confident in being able to pick up new information now, but I wish I would have done that a bit sooner.
I think I alluded to it earlier. I would say, you know, don't be in a rush to get through your undergraduate and get on with your career. Take the time, embrace learning, and get the most out of it, and get the most out of the network that you're going to build here. And the support network you have is tremendous through UBRP, so leverage that. Additional skills, Cameron, you mentioned a few that are incredibly important. I would also say some project management skills. no matter what you do in life, it'll help. It'll help, with a research program. It'll help with almost anything that you do. So that would be another skill set, I think.
Yeah, I think management skills are important. It's definitely something that they don't teach you in medical school, even though they say constantly that, you're part of a team, you're part of a team, you're part of a team, but they don't give you any skills to lead. I think looking into that, now through ASEP, which is our national body for ER doctors, they do offer a lot of leadership courses, which, I've started taking advantage of. I think the other thing too is paying attention to mental health. I wish I had done that a little bit earlier, because I think there were a lot of things, I think, going through medical school that were fairly stressful that I wish I had, had addressed issues like depression and that sort of thing earlier. And I think that was my one regret, was I wish I would have been more open to it. But I think, especially now coming out of the pandemic with everybody having that skill set to know I'm not doing well, I need to talk to a therapist, maybe I need med adjustment, that sort of thing. I wish I would have figured that out and not been so resistant to it earlier. So I think it definitely is something that is important lifelong to identify that kind of stuff and to be open to treatment too. So.
All right, thank you. Charbel, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, so this is more so for Dr. Borrero and Dr. Vogelsang. Sorry if I mispronounced your guys' names. I tried my best, but I just wanted to know, as an undergraduate who's hoping to go to medical school, how did UBRP help you guys develop skills that assisted you guys in not only the application process of medical school, but also how did it help you within medical school, and what advice would you give to undergraduates like myself who are in UBRP and want to go to medical school after college?
Do you want to go or do you want me to go?
You can go ahead. We unmuted at the exact same time. You can go ahead.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing, med school applications, being a pre-med is probably it has to be a certain level in hell with how frustrating it is. I mean, it really truly is probably the worst part of my whole education process, because you don't know. You don't know if you're going to go. You don't know if you have to make other plans. I think one thing, that I tell my scribes, because a lot of them are U of A undergrad students, is it's okay, number one, if you decide, hey, maybe medicine isn't for me, that's totally fine. I just want, for those people that are kind of on the fence about it, it is totally fine to not want to be a doctor. It's not for everybody. It's very challenging. And I've given up a lot of stuff in my life that I think, looking back on it, was a lot to give up. So I think knowing that, the application process is very frustrating, because they give you about 45 different boxes and they give you every sort of possible opportunity, leadership thing, that sort of thing. I think the biggest thing about UBRP is because I really, I think I had some shadowing. I had no leadership experience because I just didn't want to be part of a club or whatever that I felt wasn't a good use of time. So I really I probably spent 40 hours a week working in the lab, even during, semesters where I had a full course, because I really enjoyed it. People on your applications, even if it's not necessarily in medicine per se, because all I did was bench research in neuroscience, is that you're dedicated to something. So, there's a lot of people that can jump around and throw a bunch of things on their CV, but they don't actually either learn anything from it, or it's really not that big of a commitment, or they really aren't interested in it. But I think in terms of the research and everything that I learned, I learned how to read scientific papers. I learned how to put posters together. I learned how to publish papers. I learned how to, write a paper, because that stuff never goes away in medicine. You're always going to be required to do some type of, research project or research improvement project in residency. So it never really goes away. And you do have to learn how to interpret scientific journals, because that is something that will actually influence your practice, which was a huge thing with the pandemic, because we had no idea what we were treating with COVID. And so literally I would spend hours on my days off reading through scientific papers, trying to figure out what exactly does this mean? How can we reuse N95s? What does it mean, to be a aerosol generating procedure? Just all of this stuff. So those things, I think with UBRP, it might not be something that looks good on an application, or it's hard to quantify, but later in life, you'll be really happy that you did it, even if it wasn't something specifically hospital related. So.
Yeah, I'm glad you went first, because you said exactly everything I was going to say, but much more succinctly. I think in addition to, the only thing I wanted to add on is not just, when you're listing out your application, when you're looking for opportunities in undergrad, like Dr. Vogelsang said, not jumping all over the place, showing dedication, but even more so than that, showing that you're interested in things, pursuing opportunities that you're excited about. I've had the chance to, now being a fourth year, I interview the incoming medical students now. And so you can tell when people kind of just went through the rote stuff. They just felt like they had to get these things down, despite the fact that they weren't terribly engaged with it or felt that it was an important part of their education. So looking for things, even if it's not super medical, just getting passionate and showing that passion in your application, I think really goes a long way. But other than that, like Dr. Vogelsang said, being able to interpret research, being able to incorporate that into your practice are all skills that I was really forced to learn during my time in UBRP, and that I've been able to refine over my time in medical school. So I don't have anything else to add to what she said.
Well, thank you both. Vivian, would you like to ask your question next?
Yeah, so my question is, do you guys have any advice for us as like young people trying to figure out what we're doing with our lives? Like how to figure out what we're doing with our lives, like what we're gonna do for the rest of our lives? Like how did you like make that commitment and like figure that out?
So I'm laughing because I guess if you're calling yourself young, that means I'm old. Which, yeah.
That's not what I meant, but
no, you're good. I just have a constant crisis of how old I am. Sorry, other panelists. So, I spoke about it before. I came in wanting to do MD, then I switched to MD PhD, and then I eventually, wanted to do PhD. And when I finally told my PIs in my 5th year of undergrad, they're like, "Oh yeah, we knew you would figure it out." And I was like, "How did you guys know before I knew? Like, that's weird." I think what I wish I had done, although I don't regret doing 5 years, I think it gave me extra experience. I'm extremely happy that I ended up doing a master's. What maybe, I would advise y'all to do is do some soul searching, whatever that means, whether it means going on a camping trip alone or really asking yourself, like, is this what I want to do? Because what I realized is the reason why I wanted to do an MD was because I love science, not because I wanted to stick my hands in people's bodies and like, mess around with their organs or something like that. And which made me realize PhD is, an amazing opportunity for me. I think I did a lot of preparation for my med school application. I took the MCAT twice. While it was an interesting experience, I feel I probably would have enjoyed spending, that time preparing for a PhD instead. It was a lot of money to drop. So I certainly wish I hadn't dropped that amount of money, but it's in the past. So yeah, and what I found really helpful is, again, networking with people, talking with older students, talking with, your peers, because those are people that you could like be learning alongside or working with in the future. I realized the people I super loved talking to were actually PhD students, people who were more on the research side. And I realized I really aligned with them. And that sort of really spoke to me as maybe to what career, would be better suited for me. but it's okay if it takes time to figure it out.
Yeah, going off of that, I would say don't limit yourself because you're like, I have this one path, so I'm not going to do this opportunity because this doesn't align with my path. Because like there's so many other things, and you guys are in undergrad, so there's like a lot of freedom. So when I worked with Dr. Brooks, I was like, well, I'm not going to med school. It's a renal physiology lab, and I don't have like a specialty in that I want to do. But I really wanted to work with animals. I wanted to have that skill set, and I wanted to get to do more wet lab research because engineers tend to do a lot of dry lab research. So I was like, I'm going to do this opportunity because this is a good time to do it because you are so young, as you point out. And like for the high rise mission, I was an image validator. So I'm just staring at pictures of Mars and like identifying geological features. I have no background geology. I don't have a huge interest in geology. I do want to do wet lab. I don't really want to do that much dry lab, but I was like, but this is a skill set. This is something exciting because it's kind of cool to tell people that you know what Mars looks like and you see the photos before anyone else does. So like, don't deny yourself opportunities because you're like, this doesn't fit perfectly with my plan, because your plan changes and there's more than one way to get to where you want to go.
Yeah, I would have to agree with both of you. And I think, Kendra, you brought up, I think there's, you really need to think about, and it goes towards mental health as well, being mindful, right? And finding that place to know yourself and accept what is interesting to you. And I think a number of us have said, follow your passion. So take a step back and really just try and really think what interests you. And just pursue it passionately. And, it's never too late to change. I mean, many people have multiple careers throughout their life. Go for what you love.
Great. All right. Vanessa, would you go? Can't speak? Whoop. Vanessa, do you want to ask your question? Thank you.
Thank you. This is mostly for Caitlin, but anyone can feel free to answer. How did, as a BME or a similar STEM major, taking all these engineering courses translate to your current research or job? And did you find yourself not using those skills as much? And to go off of that, do you have any advice? Because sometimes I feel like I'm not bio enough, I guess.
Okay, I'm gonna try to hit everything there. My current job is not very engineering-y. It's actually not even related. And now that I have a master's, I'm extremely overqualified, but I really like it because I did a lot of leadership in undergrad. And so I like leading students, and it is clinical. BME doesn't have a huge focus on clinical here, but I really like it because I get to do that. And something that I really think is important with BME is we learn all the physics and we learn how to engineer devices, but you don't always get to see the application. Like you can build a total artificial heart, but never see someone with it functioning. So that's why I really like the clinical research right now, because I get to see like, oh, wow, a BME built this MRI and now we're using it. Well, I'm gonna find an example of my current studies. So a BME could have built a D-dimer test. And I'm like, now we're using these to identify pulmonary embolisms. And so I'm like, this is really cool. And I get to see the application. And then what was the second part of your question?
I just feel like there's a lot of physio and biology majors. And I've taken all these engineering classes and I feel like I'm not bio enough, but that's silly. I don't know if you have any advice for overcoming.
Yeah, I like to think of it a lot is a lot of the tools you're using to do the bio research, someone has to make those, someone has to engineer those. And then at my commencement speech, they point out an engineer is just a clever problem solver. Like that's the root definition. So you can apply that to however you want. That can be for building things or designing experiments even. But you have the unique perspective of knowing, oh, here are the limitations of this measurement device, or coding. I know one of the panelists spoke about improving your coding. BMEs get coding experience. Our classes cover that. And so knowing how to use MATLAB from your coursework can be a lot easier than having to learn it on the job in a lab.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so when I graduated, I think my class was the first class to have the neuroscience major available. And there were one or two of my friends that ended up being able to get enough credits to graduate with a neuroscience major. I was a physio major, but I would take, courses in neuroscience just because I was interested in it. You don't have to always take courses related to your major. Now, I know there are some issues in terms of taking, the pre-work courses, but I think some of my more valuable experiences, I tried to get an art minor at U of A. It was a little bit difficult, but I did take some courses, and it was nice just working with completely non-science people, because it's a different personality. It's honestly, I thought my art courses were harder to get good grades in because it was so subjective. But at the same time, I think it was a nice balance, because there are things that you could do, outside of science or outside of your major. And I think we just have this fear that if we don't stick to the predetermined, like, these are the courses you can take, like, you can't deviate outside of it. I think then you kind of limit yourself. So I think realizing that you don't, if you're sort of interested in it, see if you can take the course, see if there's something similar, see if you can do something in that. It's you're not stuck, to one major.
Yeah, I just want to pop in and say I think the world is moving towards a more multidisciplinary perspective in so many ways. So I think, at least in research, we're really looking for people who can talk to both the engineers and the biologists. And if you just want to be a biologist or just want to do engineering, that's also fine. We honestly need everyone. So I think if you're passionate about bridging two subjects or like having your feet in two different pots, like I say, go for it. I think everyone has their place.
As somebody that's living that, I totally agree with that. So I think, IT and research, law and research, right? There's a lot of crossover disciplines that having that background in research as a scientist is just a tremendous asset. And there's great opportunities out there, especially in those niche areas. You can make a full career out of it.
Great. Thank you. Anna, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah. So one thing I that I'm kind of nervous about, like, how do you choose where to go for like your post undergrad schooling? So like for like the MD, the PhD, whatever you end up taking, how do you choose where you end up going?
Well, unfortunately for MD, it's kind of where you get in at the end of the day. I applied to 8 schools, all of which I did some research on them beforehand and found ones that matched with my stats, my MCAT, my GPA, as well as ones that seem to have an emphasis in their mission statements about medical student wellness and trying to take care of their student body. But I interviewed at 8, or I applied to 8, I interviewed at 3, and then I got accepted into 2. And so at the end of that, it was kind of just which one felt better when I was there, which one did I feel like I connected more with the people once I was actually physically there. But MD's medical school is a bit tricky in that way, in that it kind of comes down to where your statistics are and where you actually fall.
For graduate school, the advice I got when I was applying was first to ask your advisors where they think good programs are in the country for whatever your particular interest is. And then look at those different programs and make sure there are multiple people there that interest you. Because if you apply somewhere dead set on one person, you get there, they might be a jerk, or their lab might be full, or they might not have enough funding to take you. There are so many things going on behind the scenes you're not aware of applying, that you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. So look for programs where multiple interests align with yours, and then just apply. And then when you get to the interview stage, it's a gut feeling, and you just got to go with where you feel is going to support you as best as possible.
Yeah, so I have a really strong opinion about this, so take it with a grain of salt. But I think I can definitely say for PhD that it really makes a difference if you have a very supportive community. So my number one thing in choosing a PhD program was having a supportive, positive, collaborative program, you know? And so sometimes that meant applying to some of the top schools and sometimes that didn't. And I think because for me, I had a tough master's. I worked in a very toxic lab culture. So I realized that's something I really wanted in my PhD. So thinking about what you really want in terms of program and also research will definitely help you in applying. I also am going to say, and y'all probably laugh at me for this, but get a Twitter, because academic Twitter, science Twitter, they got the T on there. So they will let you know if they don't like a place. And I would definitely say, listen to people, really network, you know, email, Twitter, tweet people, whatever the fuck it's called. And, you know, ask the tough questions, be like, what are the red flags? What do you wish this program did differently? And that's really how you find a good place for yourself.
Yeah, surprisingly, the Twitter thing, because I participate in Med Twitter, I've gotten several job offers through there, which is, I would have never thought with honestly all the shit posting that I do, that anybody would take me seriously, because I don't particularly use it as a platform, as a CV booster. It's, you know, just a lot of it is some learning stuff, you know, because I think once you get out of residency, you're always trying to find ways to stay up on the latest medical stuff and what's going on. And so that's a nice thing to do. But yeah, I think it's wild, because I've definitely gotten some job offers through there that I would have never thought that platform would be helpful that way. I mean, you don't have to do it. I totally get if you don't want to be plugged into more internet stuff, but it is an option.
Great, thank you. Niall, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes, it's pretty basic, and for basically all the alumni, I was just kind of wondering, what would you say is like the most valuable part of either going to medical school or grad school for you?
They give me a degree at the end so I can be a doctor. And it's kind of the only way to do it. Medical school sucks, and it's a long slog, and it's a lot of work. But as we kind of talked about earlier, making decisions and figuring out what you want to do with your career, I decided this is what I want to do, and this is the way you do it. This is a step on my journey. If I could go straight to being a doctor without doing all this nonsense, I would hop on it in a heartbeat. But this is what you sign up for.
Yeah, I get paid to ask questions and to goof around at a bench. It's like my dream. I love it. Yep.
I think for me, the most rewarding part of the PhD has been the people and the friends I made in my grad program. You know, I'm a few years removed now from graduating, and I'm still in touch with many, many people that I met initially in grad school. I met my wife in grad school. So there's a lot of non-lab things that happen in grad school that make a huge positive impact on your life after graduate school. And so for me, that's what I look back on.
Yeah, I think, you know, especially with trying to decide whether or not you want to do another degree, I know certainly cost can be a factor. Med school is very expensive, and once you kind of commit, you kind of can't back out if you're doing it the student loan route. So I think it is definitely, I think, difficult to think about, you know, committing that kind of money to those things, especially if you do have undergrad debt. You know, if it's a function of not knowing whether or not you want to do that, you can certainly get jobs in healthcare, and just work in the environment and see if that's something that you ultimately want to do. I think some of the biggest issues are just having a minute to kind of step back and think about everything, because I think it's really difficult when you're always trying to achieve the next goal or send in the next application. It just kind of feels like a big, it's just kind of a rat race. And so, you know, if you're really at a point that you're not sure what you want to do and you don't want to, you know, financially commit, sometimes just working for a bit in that field I know some of this stuff can be a little bit difficult because you have to look at getting certifications, like if you want to be a CNA or an LPN or do phlebotomy or work as a surgical tech, that kind of thing. And so you might have to take a little bit of time to get that type of education, but sometimes just working in that environment, it'll give you the opportunities to meet people, because I think that's honestly the most important part of the journey, is just meeting people and networking and figuring out what other people are doing, because it gives you an idea of what you want to do, or maybe what you don't want to do. So I think it's certainly perfectly fine to take some time and just work. You don't always have to be in school. Sometimes you just have to take a minute to step back and think about what you want.
All right, thank you. Ali, would you like to ask your question next?
Yeah, so mine's a little bit more of a general question, but what would you all say is the hardest part of your current occupation or career?
This is gonna sound very boring, but my training was pretty rushed because I took over for a girl who got into med school. So she was very much like, I have class in a week. Here's all the trainings I have to do. But learning all the red tape, there is a lot of bureaucracy involved with setting up clinical trials. So like I write those consent documents if you've ever done a study, and I make sure that all the IRBs are approved. So honestly, that's the hardest part about my job, is knowing who to talk to, when to talk to them, and just not getting frustrated with the process. And there's always red tape. Like even with grad school, there's red tape sometimes of like, can't take this course, or you can't do this until this is satisfied. So just don't get too frustrated and do your best to learn and reach out to people who know how the system works. So yeah.
I think I would echo what Caitlin says as well. So in the corporate world, right, there's plenty of process and bureaucracy that goes along with the job. I think also sometimes, when people are driven and they're blocked, they can become very frustrated. And so learning how to be empathetic to other people's needs and really trying to understand where they're coming from. It's a lot of the soft skills. I think that is probably one of the greatest areas of difficulty for many. And it's a great place to learn more, emotional quotients, if you will.
I would say for me, as a postdoc on the academic track, the most difficult thing is not having any control over where I move to next. So, you have some choice in where you go to grad school, you have maybe some choice where you go to med school, but then as you move up, you get fewer and fewer choices as to where you get to go next. The postdoc, you can choose basically anywhere you want to go, more or less, in terms of cities. But once you choose a postdoc and you go on the academic job market, you're limited to where jobs are opening. You're limited to where interviews you, and then who offers you a position. That's where you're probably going to go at the end of the day, if you want to stay in academia. And so not having that control over where I live next, it's mentally difficult. And so I try not to think about it most days.
Yeah, so I think science is in the middle of changing. I think more institutions and funding agencies are realizing the importance of communication skills and outreach and diversity and inclusion. So things are changing, but it's a very slow change. So I think for me, as someone who's very passionate about diversity, inclusion, outreach, and education, it's sometimes frustrating to see how slow things move sometimes. But then I'm always comforted by the fact that the amount of people I talk to, in fact, the amount of younger people who are interested in pursuing science, I have a lot of comfort in knowing where science will go because I see how passionate people are. And we're not just scientists in a basement focusing on our work now. like we are realizing the importance of communicating to the public, of, you know, supporting women in science, supporting underrepresented minorities. So I think for me, I kind of wish it would go faster. I'm certainly trying to help that go faster. But frustrating, but also very satisfying to see how far we've come and maybe how far we can go.
Right, I'll say Sunwoo, if you want, go ahead and ask your question next.
So my question might be a little like more personal, but you don't have to answer like if you're like if it's like too closer to you. But like, how did you guys fund your like graduate school or like education system or anything? Because I know medical school is like super expensive. I'm not sure about like a PhD school, but yeah.
I'll let the PhD people talk for themselves, but I will say for masters, a tuition hack that I didn't know, but being a full-time staff employee, or not even, I think I started part-time, being a part-time staff employee with full benefits covered all of my tuition. And I was like, that's a neat hack because I'm getting job experience I want. I'm in an interesting field and my tuition's covered. So there's my job tuition hack for grad school. Masters at least.
And that's great advice. Many corporations have that as well. Whereas as long as you be or better, 70, 80% reimbursed. So that is one real option.
Yeah, so I talked to my PIs to see what scientists they would advise, people they know who are good mentors doing cool science. And I looked at those institutions, depending on if I liked them, I would consider applying. But literally I Googled neuroscience, PhD, GLIA, and then University of Virginia popped up. I didn't get a Twitter until I joined here, like sometime in my first year. I think if I had a Twitter beforehand, I would have been able to network and really explore other programs. But I think talking with PIs, also talking with younger PIs who are maybe a little bit more fresh off the postdoc train, so they're more up to date on the programs, would definitely be helpful.
Yeah, and so your question, if I remember correctly, was funding mechanisms for PhD. So this probably varies across programs and across schools, but by and large, it's for PhD, you're zero out-of-pocket costs or near zero out-of-pocket costs. Tuition is covered. They'll give you a stipend where you can pay room and board. Depending on the city that you live in, it might be a little bit tighter of a budget. In some places, you might have to TA in order to get that stipend. Other places, you won't have to TA to get that stipend. Where I went, there was a centralized pool of money so that if your PI was running low on grant funds, there was a central pot of money where they could at least pay you, the grad student, until your PI recovered. Other places I've seen where the PI runs out of money, the grad students are in trouble. And so that's one thing to keep in mind as you look for PhD programs is how stable is that funding for grad students over time. And then, of course, there are fellowships that you can apply to. So the NIH has fellowships, the NSF has fellowships, the DOE has fellowships. There's plenty of places to look for money. Yeah, NSF is great. So cost-wise, I wouldn't stress about getting a PhD. You're going to be covered by and large.
Yeah, funding for, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Funding for med school isn't so much a thing. There are, there's a couple of scholarships that happened over the course of my medical school career. But a lot of it sort of comes in the terms of how are you going to repay these loans that you're going to take out, more so than how are you going to pay for it up front. There are more and more schools that are starting to offer. I think the U of A might be one of them, where if you're going into a primary care field, your tuition's covered. And seeing those types of movements is really awesome. But by and large, it's going to be taking out, like Dr. Vogelsang mentioned earlier, large volumes of loans and then figuring out what is my strategy for tackling this afterwards. There's a couple of programs in place to allow you to get forgiveness done, like the public service loan forgiveness, where if you work for a nonprofit institution, and you make payments for 10 years, the rest of your loans will be forgiven. There's also a bunch of different ways you can consolidate and refinance and work on getting the loan burden down. But I think by going to medical school, unless you have some large endowment from your parents or some other source, that entails taking out loans to fund it.
All right. So I think we probably have time for one more question potentially. So David, we'll let you go ahead and ask your question.
Say that between your undergraduate and graduate school is the best time to do research abroad, and then just like how you got into that in general.
So I did a semester abroad through Bravo, and Bravo is a biomedical research abroad Vistas Open program through UBRP. I'm not sure if it's still a thing. You might want to talk with someone within UBRP about that.
So right now, Bravo's not active, but we are looking to hopefully bring it back at some point. Just to answer your question, Cameron.
Okay. So Bravo is a great study abroad research focused program where there was some host institute in some other country that has a formal collaboration with your PI, and you could apply, and Bravo and UBRP would fund that semester abroad. There are many ways I think that you could do research abroad, and Kendra did research abroad as an in-between as well. I applied through a fellowship program that allowed me to pick the country I wanted to work in and then move to that country and find a lab. Other cases, you can pick the country and then look for funding that allows you to live in that country. So in Europe, if you wanted to move to Germany, for example, there's the DAAD fellowship that you could apply to. It's really super country dependent what you want to do. I would, if you can do it, I would so strongly recommend doing it. You're going to get exposed to a different way of thinking about research compared to what you're doing now. A research environment in, a small town in Italy is going to be very different than doing it in Tucson. There's just so many things that are different that are going to expand your horizon in terms of how you think about research being done. And one thing I noticed also is that the labs that I was in while I was over there were more international, obviously, because all the countries are so close together compared to America. And that was my first exposure to meeting people from other countries, really. And so that also had a huge impact on my life. I don't know how Kendra did her master's, but I'm sure there are great options to do that abroad as well if you want to do that before grad school.
Yeah.
There's
So
also, you go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So I was going to say, this is obviously if you get into medical school, but you can do work abroad. I know that with my medical school, they had a pretty strong, medicine abroad program where they would help pay for most of the travels and that sort of thing. I went to Bangladesh for a month. I had a friend who was trying to finish up her master's of public health and wanted to do that abroad. So I actually went with her, and I did get some funding through the school. Now, I helped with, getting IRB approval and that sort of thing, because we were doing some epidemiology research on burns in Bangladesh. And we actually went to a burn hospital there in the main city, Dhaka. And, I think that was fairly interesting, but there's a lot of opportunities where you can get that type of stuff paid for in medical school. It's a little bit harder in residency because of how the funding is allocated. So unless they have something pre-set up, because I asked a lot of people on the interview journey, it was just difficult because then they would have to find funding for you a different way. So I didn't do any in residency, but certainly as a medical student, you have a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, so my experience wasn't a semester abroad. It was originally supposed to be a year, and then I was like, they're paying me to live abroad and do cool science. I'll stay for a master's. This is where really having close relationships with PIs really helped, because my PIs, they're like, oh yeah, we know these people. They gave me a list of people all across the world that they knew would be supportive mentors. They also did this for grad school. They're very nice. And I just emailed them. I said, hey, I'm currently in Lynn and Leslie's lab. They recommended, I check you out because I'm interested in doing research, and this is why I'm passionate about it, blah, blah, blah. I actually originally applied to the Fulbright, but I didn't get it. But what's really nice is a lot of master's programs abroad, particularly in Asia, actually pay you. So I had free tuition and fees, and I also got a stipend. So I really encourage you, if it's something you're interested in, network with professors at the university. I'll also drop my email in the chat. We can totally talk about it if you all want. But it was really an amazing experience.
Great, thank you. And with that, unfortunately, I think we're going to have to conclude our panel. Let's thank our panelists today for their time, and we appreciate you sharing about your journey and your experience. I think we've all learned quite a lot, and we appreciate it very, very much. Thank you all.